everybody. Welcome. Mary Hunt here at Water with Diane New and also our dear Cheryl Nichols is in the middle office as we speak. I want to welcome everybody to this event with our friend and colleague Phyllis Zagano, whose book, The Vatican and Women Deacons, was published recently by Orbis. I shamelessly will hawk it as often as I can during this hour to simply say it's a great piece of work, and it is something I think should be required reading a lot of places. I'll talk about that at the end, but I really want to congratulate Phyllis on this. It's going to get some awards. There's no question about that. And it is a service to God and community. And I think we have to take it very seriously, and I certainly do. Um, I'm glad everybody's here, and I really want to welcome all of you, especially welcome Phyllis, who's really being welcomed back. Phyllis, the last time you were here, it was with Elizabeth Davis. Do you remember that? You, we did
Yes,
a
in
program
Canada. How
that
is
was,
she? Yeah,
yeah, we did a program with the Canadians, some
yeah.
Canadians. In fact, Veronica Dunn is on. She may have some update on that, but um, great groups in Canada and the US. It was you and Elizabeth Davis, and that was Elizabeth is a Mercy sister from Canada who was a delegate to the synod, the recent synod, and it was a very good conversation as I recall it. So again, welcome back to you, and a particularly warm water welcome to those who are new to this circle. If this is your first water event, we're especially delighted to have you with us. We hope you will feel at home and inclined to join us for other such programs. We at Water always begin our programs with a land acknowledgement, something that we've incorporated to remind ourselves of why we do what we do and what we need to do more of, given the systemic injustice that Indigenous and other peoples of color face in this country. A land acknowledgement is a beginning, not an end, a time to reflect on our history and to commit to justice making. Water is on Indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward Indigenous people and other people of color that is deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work, whether intellectual, spiritual, liturgical, is aimed to bring about social justice. That's why we exist. Please, with me, consider in a quiet moment the Native people on whose land you sit, and if you would like, in our moment of silence, put their names in the chat. Thank you. We can also take a quiet moment to acknowledge the difficult time we find ourselves in as citizens of the world, as wars rage and human and planetary rights are violated worldwide. Water's commitment to nonviolent efforts to stem the tide is shared by so many people. Let this hour of study and discussion be directed toward global peace and well-being. Thank you. Let me mention our format, especially for those who are new to water programs. I will introduce our speaker, Dr. Phyllis Zagano, who will share an overview of her important new book with us for 20 minutes or so. And then the floor will be open for questions and discussion until the top of the hour. Now, we are on the East Coast in the US. Some of you are in other parts of the world where it is. Sheila Curran, I'm looking at you in Dublin. It must be 6 o'clock at night. Yeah, and folks on the West Coast here, it's still in the morning, and other folks who are elsewhere. Janice, I see on the West Coast. But we really want to respect everybody's schedule. So we'll close officially at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. But we keep the Zoom open after that for conversation. Particularly if we are in the middle of a discussion, we will close. Believe me, we'll close, but we will continue discussing as we can, with or without Phyllis. I know she has a busy day today, so but we respect your schedules. Please listen and enjoy. We will take notes, which will be on our website shortly, along with the video of this session, and you can access it by going to Water's website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under Programs and Teleconferences with today's date and Phyllis's name in the book cover. And feel free to watch this again or to share it with others. Excuse me, we'll send you notes and the link to the video next week once our interns get the video up on our website. Our effort here is to socialize these valuable resources of Water Talks, especially for people who are not able to study formally or those who wish to continue their education in the field but outside of institutions of higher learning. So please feel free to use this session as you will. And again, we're going to be talking with Phyllis Zagano about her book, The Vatican and Women Deacons, which I highly recommend, from Orbis Press. Let me introduce Phyllis Zagano, and then I will turn the microphone over to her. Welcome to you, Phyllis, my dear, who served on the first Papal Commission, 2016 to 2018, well chronicled in the book, dealing with the question of women deacons. Let me introduce you, Phyllis, by reading from your wonderful book, from which I learned a lot about contemporary ecclesiology, not all of which is pretty. But this was fun to find on page 120 in a chapter about the final luncheon of the commission. Pope Francis, as you write, approached the table where the commissioners were obviously having their noonday meal. I'm sure it was a sumptuous feast with wine. Approached the table, he did, and informally thanked the commissioners. The Pope asked who the first deaconess would be. You can imagine the sense of humor of Pope Francis. Who will that first deaconess be? He asked the group. The commissioners pointed to Zagano. Unquote. So despite the fact that the commission could not agree on whether or not to reinstitute the diaconate for women, they could at least agree that Phyllis Zagano would be the prototype, the first deacon to be ordained. So Francis was duly put on notice. So this work on the diaconate of yours, Phyllis, is not simply an academic exercise, but something to which obviously you feel called. Phyllis Zagano is an internationally recognized Catholic scholar and lecturer on contemporary spirituality and women's issues in the church, with a singular, may I say, laser focus on women in the diaconate. As we wrote in our water blurb about the book, quote, when Roman Catholic women are ordained as deacons, Phyllis Zagano will be credited with the win. Her meticulous scholarship and tireless chronicling of a process that never should have taken this much time and this much wrangling will be the documents of record. This is the book we discussed today, though it is most likely that most of us will not live to see women deacons. But those who do can thank Phyllis for serving up their church history on a silver platter. Phyllis's extensive bio is on the Hofstra University website, where she is a senior research associate in residence and adjunct professor of religion. She received a BA from Marymount College in Tarrytown, three master's degrees in communications from Boston University, in literature from Long Island University, and theology from St. John's University, and then a PhD in religion and literature from the State University of New York at Stony Brook. Dr. Zagano is the author or editor of more than 27 books in religious studies, including Holy Saturday, An Argument for the Restoration of the Female Diaconate in the Catholic Church, published in 2000, and Just Church, Catholic Social Teaching, Synodality, and Women, published by Paulus Press in 2023. So she has not tired of this topic. Obviously, she's been writing about women's diaconate for more than 25 years. With each successive publication, including today's book, it is clearer and clearer that the case against, quote, providing the possibility of women as persons being included in all ministries of our church, yes, that famous quote from St. Sister Teresa Kane, who put it so remarkably well, that case grows weaker and more pathetic with each book that Phyllis publishes. She has the rare ability to communicate erudite scholarship in readable, accessible prose. This book is a persuasive argument for the common sense practice of including all who wish to serve. How hard can that be? Phyllis lectures widely at universities, conferences, churches, places where people are interested in solid theology, clear presentation, and fair-minded debate, like water. These are the hallmarks of her work, which she shares with us today. Thank you, Phyllis. We begin in your debt.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be among friends. You know, I spoke at a Franciscan monastery not too long ago, and a lady wrote and complained to the friars that I was doing the work of Satan. So, you know, it's not all roses. Since Mary talked about Pope Francis, I'll read a little bit from the beginning of the book, and then I'll take you through it kind of quickly. But I entered the discussion on the diaconate in 1978 when I was a part-time student at Immaculate Conception Seminary in Huntington, New York. My classmates and I were alerted to the pending visit of the papal nuncio to the United States, Archbishop Jean Jadot. Seminarians were to wear house cassocks and sash. I wore a yellow pantsuit. I was noticed. During the luncheon following the Mass, the Archbishop's secretary came to me and said the Archbishop wished to speak with me in the front hall. The next 20 minutes predicted the rest of my life. I told Archbishop Jadot I was at the seminary studying to be a deacon. After interviewing me at length, he said, "Don't quit." Pope Francis said the same thing to me the last time I spoke with him. And that was about a year or so before he died. I have great Pope Francis stories, but I'll tell you about that. Mary shared one of them with you. And just after that incident at the final luncheon for our commission, the priest across from me, who was a CDF staffer, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, I said, why can't women be ordained as deacons? He said, because women cannot image Christ. And I said, watch me. And I went home and wrote a book called Women Icons of Christ. But that's another book and another day. This particular book is an outgrowth of about 5 years of study about the discussion. There have been 6 commission studies, or 6 commissions that tried to study the diaconate of women. It's kind of a tortured road, because the same things are said over and over again, and I find it disappointing that the study always reverts to whether women can be ordained, and not the real question, which is whether women should be ordained. There's no question that women were ordained as deacons in history. And some of the women who were called deacons or deaconesses may not have been ordained. That's okay. But you can't say that no woman was ever ordained as a deacon. The bishops used the same liturgy, the same actions within the celebration of the Mass. The women deacons self-communicated from the chalice. They received a stole, and the bishop called them deacons. I mean, I don't know what more information is needed. And in fact, at the end of this book, if you really are interested, there's a complete Latin liturgy from the 8th century, which explains, and if you're ordaining a man a deacon, you use this pronoun. If you're ordaining a woman a deacon, you use this pronoun. And I will tell you that I sent that liturgy at the request of a member of the synod to the so-called Study Group 5 and to the synod office. And I'm told that it wasn't paid attention to. So we talk a little bit about deacons in the early church. We don't have to really rehearse it. I'm on my way to St. Louis tomorrow, and I remember years ago being in St. Louis at a Catholic college theology meeting, and Gary Macy had just come out with one of his books, and he said, "No, history is not dispositive. Yeah, no one will ever decide specifically that this particular woman was ordained sacramentally in this particular place at this particular time. But if history is not dispositive, it's not dispositive in either direction, and that's, I think, what we need to agree to." So the fight has been going on off and on, really since the Council of Trent, which at its session 23 said in liturgies, lectors are to be lectors, only acolytes are to be acolytes, subdeacons are to be subdeacons, deacons are to be deacons. And that never really caught on, okay? It wasn't until the Second Vatican Council that the diaconate as a permanent vocation, a permanent office in the church, was reestablished by Paul VI. who at that time, I'm told, asked Cipriano Vagagini, what about women deacons? And Vagagini wrote a response which did not become a document of the International Theological Commission. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. There was a lot of commentary after the Council of Trent. And as you can imagine, there were two sides. Jean Morin said yes. He examined all of the liturgies in Greek, in Latin, in the Eastern languages. And he said, yeah, it's fine. Jean Pien, the next thing that happened was the Holy Synod of Mount Lebanon for the Maronite Church rejiggered its canon law, and there were two interesting canons which have never been abrogated. One is, Bishop, you can ordain women as deacons, and number two, this is what they do. Now, the Maronite Church is considered an Eastern Catholic church, but it was never part of Orthodoxy, which is an interesting situation. So we already have Catholic canon law that allows the ordination of women as deacons. But then we have Jean Pien in the early 18th century who said, no, they're all wrong. And so, as I said, we got to the council, and the council allowed for a restoration of the diaconate as a permanent vocation for men. The discussion was whether married men would be included. There was discussion about that, but in any event, it happened. Then, as the book tells you, and there was a Synod of Bishops in 1971, and a Canadian bishop stood up and said, there's no reason not to have women in the diaconate. And that went on. But the question of what to do about women still was festering. So in 1973, Pope Paul VI began his commission on the role of women in society and in the church. And at that commission, very interesting, I noticed somebody is here from Marymount. I found one living member of that commission. Her name is Deborah Seymour. She was Marymount Arlington. And I spoke with her about what happened in the commission. And she said it was quite clear. There was a woman from India who I just missed. She just died at like 103. But anyway, a woman from India who said, what about women deacons? And there was conversation in 1973 about this particular topic, and it was pushed aside. Now, let me go into a little bit without the boring details about the archival activity I was able to, or the archival access I was able to get. Cardinal Farrell, who's the prefect for the dicastery for the laity, allowed me into the closed archives for laity for this particular commission that I'm talking about, the 1973 to 1975 Commission on the Role of Women in Society and the Church. I'll tell you, if I get the energy, I have enough research just from that commission to do a whole nother book. I had somebody working for me in Rome. I said, I don't care, Xerox everything. Whatever you find, we'll figure it out later. And the good news is it was mostly in English and French, which made it kind of easy for me. And at that commission, there is really, it explains the rest of the story, because the conversation about women deacons is shut down, saying you can't have women deacons because it leads to priesthood. And by the way, the International Theological Commission is already studying priesthood. Now, the first iteration of the International Theological Commission, 1969 to 1976, did have two members, one priest named Nemeshegi, another named Vagagini. I found the archives for Vagagini in northern Italy. He was a Camaldolese Benedictine. And it was Vagagini who was asked by Paul VI, as I said earlier, to study the question and give him an answer on whether women could be ordained as deacons. During that particular that particular commission, it was the first iteration of the commission, of the International Theological Commission, had fabulous theologians. Nemeshegi and Vagagini tried to force a vote in favor of women in the diaconate, but the discussion was pushed over to priesthood. And what came out of the ITC after that was not ordinanza, inter and signores, which essentially said women can't be ordained as priests only because they can't image Christ and the church does not have the authority to ordain them. Well, the discussion continued after that, but it wasn't picked up until the International Theological Commission's fifth quinquennium in 1992. And I have spoken to a member of that quinquennium, and I have in writing from him that they produced a 17-page document that said it was okay to ordain women as deacons. No big deal. All 30 members voted on it, and it was not promulgated. Well, it wasn't promulgated because the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith at the time, who actually had been the one to steer the conversation away in 1976, steered the conversation about deacons away to priesthood, was one Joseph Ratzinger. And so I'm dying to see that document. I asked for it when I was on my commission. It's there in the DDF archives, but there is a document. I asked the person who told me, I said, could you have a copy of it? He said, it's in the trash bin at Fumicino. I said, well, that doesn't help me, but there is a document that was voted on, but not promulgated. So then it was picked up again, 1997 to 2002, the sixth quinquennium of the International Theological Commission. And magically, the document grew from 17 pages to 78 pages. And the small section on women deacons is very interesting because all of the footnotes, or most of the footnotes, I'd say 70% of the footnotes to this section are from German sources, and they are all post 1997. So these are footnotes added to the earlier document post 1997, mostly in German. And it seems to me that the writer involved in that was one Gerhard Mueller. And the reason I think that is because a document did come out in 2002. And what it said was, this is up to the magisterium to determine, basically. But we did a computer search. This is before AI, but anyway, we did a computer comparison in English and in German between the ITC document in English and a book by Gerhard Mueller in English, and between the ITC document in German and the book by Gerhard Mueller in German. And I brought that over to the German department to check my homework, and they said, Mr. Mueller needs to see the dean because there's a little bit of plagiarism here. So what I'm saying to you is that there are uncited passages, concepts, ideas, 18 of them, in the 2002 document from the International Theological Commission from Gerhard Mueller. And I did talk to someone on that commission. I don't have it recorded, but I have a recollection that he said, yeah, we knew we had Mueller's work available to us, but apparently nobody looked carefully enough to see that the wording was the same. Anyway, so then things languished because it's up to the magisterium to determine, well, the magisterium was John Paul II. And the next magisterium was Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger. So it wasn't until Francis came to his second meeting with the International Union of Superiors General, the UISG, where they were able to ask 6 questions. And one of the questions, I think the second question was, why can't we be ordained? We're doing the work of deacons. Why can't we be ordained as women were ordained as deacons in the early church? And Francis said, that's probably not a bad idea. I'll see what's around for that. And well, why don't you have a commission? Yes, I will have a commission. So that was in May. And 2nd of August, I don't know if this is in the book, but around the 2nd of August in that year, I was in Bermuda shorts and a t-shirt, picking up my mail at my office, and all of a sudden my computer was exploding because I didn't know why. Most of it was in Italian, and somebody sent me a list, and at the bottom of this list was my name in alphabetical order, and I was the only person from the Western Hemisphere to be sent to Rome to be on this commission. I was nominated by the International Union of Superiors General. There were three of us, three nominees, myself, Nuria Kalduk, who's now the president of the Pontifical Biblical Commission, Mary Maloney, who at the time was the rector of the Franciscan seminary over there, and who is now the head of her order, and myself. And I didn't know anybody at UISG. I mean, this was not an inside job, because I called them up when I got there and said, maybe I should come and see you. And I did meet the executive director and the president at the time, and they said, we were stunned that you were taken, So I said, well, you were stunned. Anyway, I don't know if it's in the book, but I lived in the Pope's house for about 5 months over the 2-year period of the commission. And I can't talk about my commission. I can tell you what the UISG said about the commission, because we worked from 2016 to 2018. We had 4 meetings. And in 2019, in May, Pope Francis gave the nuns at their triennial meeting the little they, us, we, the commission, the little they agreed upon. I was in the aula. I didn't know what he was talking about. And eventually the sisters said that they had received a sort of a report about the history of women in the diaconate, not on letterhead, not signed, just as an addendum to something. It says in Italian at the top of it, handwritten addendum. And 3 times I asked Cardinal Ladaria, who was the secretary of CDF or when we began, and became the prefect of DDF and a cardinal. I asked him 3 times, twice in writing and once in person, if I could please see what he gave the Pope. And he said, oh, he got everything. And I said, well, could I please see it? No. So I have no idea what the transmittal letter said. I have no idea what he got. We did a lot more work than just the history. And none of us has any idea what the Holy Father received. I can tell you that I made sure the Holy Father knew that because I was over in Rome a couple of times and saw him. But anyway, then you have the Amazon Synod. And the interesting thing about the Amazon Synod is 2/3 of the bishops there were asking for women deacons. Francis said, I've heard your request. I'll pick up the gauntlet, and I'll recall the commission, meaning the 2016-2018 commission. And he didn't. He named 10 other people on the 8th of April in 2020 to a second pontifical commission, which was delayed because of COVID. It met 3 times, twice in session for the initial run of the commission in September of 2021 and in July of 2022. And then as the synod got rolling, the synod had asked, obviously, for our report and any report from the second commission. They got nothing. In between 2023 and 2024, October of each year, the study groups were invented and created. And study group 5, which no one knows who belonged to it, study group 5 was given the task of women in the diaconate. And we later found out that study group 5, while it said it would receive entries and information, as I said at the top, I sent them certainly this liturgy that's in the back of the book and other articles. Study group 5 referred all of those materials to the second commission. And so that second commission met in February of 2025. And then since then, you have in December of 2025, you have the so-called Petrocchi letter, which is published only in Italian. I translated it, and it was published in America Magazine online with my commentary. And then in March of 2026, actually, March of 2026, you have the Study Group 5 report. I'll close by just talking a little bit, because I know you want to have questions, but I'll talk a little bit about the Petrocchi letter, which to me is a fascinating document, because it is not a research document. It's just kind of a letter to the Pope saying this is our opinion, but it's not substantiated except by votes from either the first meeting, the second meeting, or the third meeting. Well, let me tell you about those meetings. 10 people were appointed. Okay. At the first meeting, one person was ill. Okay. But they still had 10 people because they assigned another person. So now you have the original 9 and another person in there, unnamed. That's the first meeting. The second meeting, okay, 2 of the original people are sick. Okay. So now you have 8 people at the second meeting. At the third meeting, the sick person from the first meeting returns because one of the ill people from the second meeting has died. So here's my point. There is no consistency in the conversation in the Petrocchi Commission. It's maddening to me. So to have these kinds of citations of votes, it's meaningless. Well, the bottom line about the Petrocchi Commission is that we don't think women can be ordained because they can't image Christ. Well, let me tell you something. That in persona Christi Servi comment, which showed up in 2002 from Mueller, is invented in 2002. We're studying all of the comments about the diaconate, and we can't find that before 2002. Why are they saying in persona Christi Servi, in the person of Christ the servant? Because of the history of in persona Christi Capitis Ecclesiae, in the person of Christ, the head of the church, connected to priesthood. What's the other point? In 1994, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis and the Responsum ad Dubium affirmed that women could not be ordained as priests. How did it affirm them? It affirmed it by saying the church does not have the authority to ordain women as priests. What's missing? What's missing is women cannot image Christ in 1994. So now you have the Petrocchi Commission in 2025 arguing that the nuptial mystery of salvation, whatever that means, no one I know has ever heard of that, is disrupted by arguing that women can image Christ. So sorry, ladies. What Sister St. Thomas told me in the 4th grade is wrong. I am not the only Jesus people are going to see today. And that is an official comment from Rome. The only other thing that I could point out is the Petrocchi letter and the Study Group 5 report bring up lector, acolyte, and catechist as new ministries. And I'm torn, but I'm kind of thinking that that's not a bad thing. I don't think it's to replace the argument for the diaconate. In fact, I know it isn't. To me, it's a both and. But I think it needs a lot of explanation. So we have 25 minutes, and Mary is going to have 5 minutes at the end. So we have 20 minutes, I guess, to talk.
Thank you very much, Phyllis Zagano. I said at the end of my introduction that we were in your debt. Now we're even more deeply in your debt. The book is The Vatican and Women Deacons, and I think you have just laid out not only your sense of the arguments for women deacons, but the chronology and dynamics that change church practice. But the story you've told reminds me of how corrupt the whole thing can be. It sort of ends up in points like a bad B movie. This one gets sick and that one dies. And some other little sleights of hand that come along. Whereas there are perfectly reasonable strategies, for example, like Gary Macy said, acknowledging history is not dispositive one way or the other, and then attempting to change the focus from whether women were ordained or not to the fact that the world needs deacons.
That's right.
And that's been your view, which I think is a very common sense view. It's not the question. If history can't solve it, okay. But the issue is not whether or not. The issue is what the world needs, or as we say in the Women Church Convergence movement, the needs of the world and not the failings of the church set the agenda. So it seems to me also that logic would dictate that an organization that seeks to do good in the world would welcome people who want to help others. So as you read the scene, what's so problematic about this? I mean, where's the opposition most deeply rooted? I just thought you might say something about that, and then I'd like to open the floor to all kinds of conversation as people would like where people would like to take this. And I'd like to hear you comment also on Benedict XVI's motu proprio omnium inventum on Canon 108, because I think that's really a linchpin that raises a very significant question. If in fact those, and I'm going to quote from it, those who are uh, constituted in the order of episcopate or presbyterate receive the office and faculty of acting in the person of Christ the head, while deacons receive the power to serve the people of God in the diaconia of liturgy, word, and charity. Doesn't it seem a step backward? As the canon earlier referred to all of those priest, deacon, priest, and bishop as acting in persona Christi, do male deacons know they got a demotion that day?
I don't know this demotion because it's more in keeping with Lumen Gentium 29 and the Mary with the Omnium Inventum in 2009. He is following on add-on comments he made in 2006 to the priests of Rome, where he said that more space, pure spatio, but he was beginning to say that there, this distinction in the question. He was questioned about women in ministry. He was beginning to say that this is possible. We need to understand it. And I will tell you that in talk about how long things take. In footnote to the 2002 ITC document, there is in the ITC document comments trying to join priesthood and diaconate, and a footnote to the ITC document in 2002 says, oh, and by the way, they're changing canon law to reflect the distinction. So it took from 2002 to, to 2009 to promulgate something that was, changing it. So I think, anyway.
Well, but I think the issue here is if it's the current practice, or if it's your view, which I know it is, that the diaconate is separate from the presbyterate and the episcopacy. Why then are men still ordained to the diaconate as part of their move toward priesthood? I mean,
that was Paul Lakeland's first book in 1973, that people didn't need to be ordained as deacons. I
right,
think
but I'm
I
just
think
saying,
the Latin Church has lost its memory of the diaconate, whereas the Eastern Church has not. And so the Cursus Honorum, which was broken up by Paul VI, really only came into being in around the 12th century. It was codified when Gresham codified canon law. Prior to that, and part of the reason for the cursus honorum was there would be tonsure, then you'd be porter, lector, exorcist, acolyte, and then the major orders of subdeacon, deacon, and priest. Part of the reason that became so codified in church practice and law is that when the bishop died, typically you would hire for the next bishop someone who was already running the diocese. Well, that would have been the archdeacon. And that was happening all over Europe. We have 37, 36 popes who were never priested. And so the priests in Rome particularly got a little annoyed about that because they figured they would be better candidates. And so it became the practice and eventually the law that went through the cursus honorum. That was broken up by Paul VI. They tried to break it up, at least in terms of liturgical ministry, as I mentioned earlier, during Trent, saying that only lectors are the readers, only acolytes are the acolytes. I was thinking of this morning, in 1950 or 40, when you had the mass, you had a subdeacon, a deacon, and a priest in the mass, but they were probably all priests. And so that omnium momentum, and I was challenged on that when I was in Rome. They said, "Oh, that's not what Benedict meant." I said, "Well, I'll go ask him." And
Well,
I
that's
did.
what I was going to say, because Benedict, apart from disagreeing with most of what he said, he's a very good theologian, and I think this is his Achilles heel. I mean, you
Not an
can't have
Achilles
both ways.
heel. I think two things. First of all, I'm told that if the ban on women priests was infallible, he would have been the one to do it, and in fact, he's the one who talked John Paul II out of it.
Yeah,
In terms of women deacons, if there was any way to promulgate a permanent theological ban against ordaining women deacons, Benedict is the one who could have written it, and he couldn't write it. So I think he had to admit that the diaconate was not the priesthood, and that I think had other interests in mind, because at the time there was a great argument for deacons to sacramentally anoint ill and dying people, which we know women deacons did in history. Women deacons perform many more sacraments than men deacons, but he may have been doing it in thinking in that direction, not in the direction of women in the priesthood. But I did ask to see him, and I got a rejection from Ganswein that it would be unfortunate, unable. And the only time I
had
got,
to wash his hair that day.
yeah,
Just
well, no, the only time I got near him, I was actually uh, walking in the gardens with the man who's now the Vicar General of Rome, and we were both shooed out because Benedict was going to be pushed around in his wheelchair. So,
oh
but
dear.
I couldn't get to Benedict to ask him about that. But I was challenged on it, and I said, "But it's there." I mean, I didn't
Yeah,
invent
it seems
omnium
quite
momentum.
clear. Yep.
And it's quite clear. So I think the question, well, I was told 30 years ago by the uh, highest placed woman in Rome, hello, Marymount, wherever you are. She was a religious Sacred Heart of Mary, and she said they can't say no. They just don't want to say yes. And so
That's
I
right.
think we come back to the question of why are they, what is the cultural problem? What is the problem? I think the problem is culture. And the reason I say that is because in October of 2025, Pope Leo met with the European Synod teams, and the woman who was the chair of the European Synod team, quite frankly and forcefully said, we want women in leadership and we want ordained women as deacons. And in his response, he used the word culture 6 times in 2 paragraphs. And so, well, what's the culture? Is the culture the 108 acres of the Vatican? That's part of the problem. But there are other cultures that would have problems, and that's where I'm beginning to think that the I wouldn't say push, but the discussion from Study Group 5 and even from the Petrocchi letter or report from the Second Commission, talking about installing women as lectors, installing women as acolytes, and the new ministry, installed ministry of catechists, are important. And these are in 2 different spaces here. The installed liturgical ministries of lector, when when it was finally agreed that women could be lectors, there was a comment from the Congregation for Sacraments, Divine Worship of the Sacraments, um, that they could not read from inside the altar, inside the altar rail. They couldn't be at the ambo. So that's been away now. Lectors in most places are male or female are reading from inside the sanctuary. But the other point is, so now you can have women officially installed as lectors inside the sanctuary. The other one is more interesting to me. The acolyte, the rubrics say that an adult participating in a mass inside the altar rail should wear an alb. Now, if you have an installed woman as an acolyte, she's going to be on the other side of the fence, as I've heard it called. And that could allow the culture to receive the possibility of a woman sort of vested. Now that's the liturgical side of the street. On the other side of the street, you have the catechist, and the catechist is not, the directory hasn't been done yet for the United States. It won't be till 2028, but the catechist is to be a witness to the gospel. Well, if the catechist is formally installed, trained and ordained, officially installed by the bishop, wouldn't that be an argument for allowing the catechist to be a preacher? And so I think that those ministries could soften the culture. Certainly not in the United States. The United States is ready. Central and South America are ready. Australia is ready. New Zealand is ready. Germany is ready. Belgium is ready. Ireland is ready. But there are other cultures
Yeah,
that are not.
yeah.
And so when I was asked by the National Catholic Reporter a week or so ago, what's your advice to the Pope? I'd simply say, well, you have to say women can be ordained as deacons, and it's up to a National Episcopal Conference to decide whether they want it, and then up to individual bishops to decide if they will accept them in their diocese.
Yeah, and you make the good point in the book that synodality and subsidiarity go together, and
That's
that
right.
is the twin recipe for making that work.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that. Let me open the floor with great thanks, Phyllis, to others who would like to make comments, and please feel free. Put your hand up if you can using the react button at the bottom of your screen, and you simply raise your hand. It will take you to the top of the queue, which is where I will see your hand and we'll call upon you and invite you to say who you are, where you're from, and very quickly what you'd like to comment to Phyllis Zagano. So the floor is open, and I will lower my hand lest there be any suggestion that I'm going to take up even more airtime, which I'm not. Okay, Janet, go ahead.
Yes, I used to have a lapel pin that said, ordain women or don't baptize them. I'm wondering if you could speak to the connection, implications of baptism and ordination. Um, how I think I know how they fit together, but I would like to hear what you think about that.
Well, I mean, I think it's obvious. I think that in the 16th or 17th century, now I'm confused, maybe 16th century, there was a discussion in Europe on what they call the querelle de femme, on whether women were the same species as men. And I think that is where the sorry, Judy, so she's upset, but this is true. They could not get themselves to recognize women as fully human. So whereas we understand baptism as incorporating us fully into the Christian life, I think there's still a lot of cultures that have a lot of problem. I will tell you, I sat at Rome with cardinals and told them point blank that until a woman, an ordained woman, was standing next to the Pope in St. Peter's Square proclaiming the gospel and preaching, they had no right to make any comments about, or I would blame them for FGM. I would blame them for dowry burnings. I would blame them for wife beating because they were supporting the argument that women are not the same species, that women are not valuable human beings. So, the theological arguments, discussion about baptism, I would refer to Susan Wood at formerly of Marquette, now at St. Michael's in Toronto. But I mean, it's to me, it's just an obvious thing. The argument, I've never really had much of research or discussion about the priesthood. I just haven't. But I think it's a whole nother discussion. Cardinal Avery Dulles told me that the legitimate discussion now and legitimized by the Catholic Church is which of the four levels of teaching is the teaching on women priests. But for my money or for my studies, there is no teaching on women deacons. There's nothing official. They keep saying it's up to the magisterium to decide, and the magisterium is not doing anything. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's about all I know.
Well, yes, but I think when we talk about the diaconate, we're also talking about ordination, right? I mean, not to the priesthood, but to a very official office in the church.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Well, I don't think one implies the other. And I
no,
think
no,
that,
I agree with that.
and I think that that's the important part of it. So if, yeah, surely if you're capable to be, if you're eligible for baptism, you should be eligible for the ordination
Yeah.
to the diaconate, and then you revert to history. The study is historical, theological, and anthropological. The historical, if you get two academics, as you well know, Janet, in the room, you'll have four opinions. So that'll never be solved. The theological discussion to me is clear, as Mary pointed out, omnium and mentum. Well, that's legal, but anyway, there's no theological argument against ordaining women as deacons, including your concern about baptism. But the question is anthropological. And I do think that there is a significant, and by anthropological, I will say cultural, a significant problem with a significant number of people. I don't know, I don't understand it. I don't know why they are so hysterical about the fact of women uh, ordained as deacons, because I think we need more ministry. I mean, it's a need of the church, and it's a need that has been fulfilled for many, many years by women religious. In fact, it's women religious who picked up the diaconal needs of the church as the diaconate faded. I've never done a real study, but you can see that as the diaconate fades, women religious grow. And
Absolutely.
whether we're talking about beginning with Catherine of Siena or Mary Ward or anyone else, that is going away. And I think another problem for that is there is a confusion now between consecrated life and the office of deacon. And I don't think they cannot be conjoined, but I don't think one replaces the other. And I think that women who wish to have a celibate commitment and consecration to God and to the church should find themselves a religious institute or order. And if they in those institutes or orders wish to be ordained as deacons, go for it. But others, married women, and that's another problem because we have married women ordained as deacons. I don't think the church can think about a woman being under the control of a bishop and a husband. I think that's, and I have a whole book about that. But I
Let's not go there, Phyllis.
well,
No, it's important. No, this is a very important point. I'm going to move on though to some other people who have questions. So, Janet, with thanks to you, let's. Okay, Claire, we don't see you, but we see your hand. Just
you
to
have
get,
to unmute, dear.
Can you hear me?
we can hear you. We can't see you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. The argument that women
Excuse me,
cannot,
Claire, we can't see you. If you could put your video on,
oh,
thank you.
okay.
Claire, where are you?
While Claire gets straightened out here, somebody else have a question? Let's see who's next. There is Claire. Okay, thank you, Claire.
Sorry about that. I'm on my phone and was a little trickier. The argument that women cannot image Christ, is that really as simple as women are not men? Like, is there any
Yes.
more depth to that? Okay.
No. No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. It's called naive physicalism by Elizabeth Johnson. I call it Arianism because if you are limiting the human male Jesus to history and that's it, then you become a Unitarian, I think, or you are really, it's a form of Arianism. And I don't think they recognize that. When at one point, a secretary of the International Theological Commission in 1976, in presenting Inter Insignores, said Jesus was, is, and remains a male. Well, yeah, but you're kind of denying the resurrection and the resurrection as it lives in all people. So Yes, it is. That is, it's as simple as that.
Okay.
I had a
Thank
man
you.
ask me that. I was working at the food pantry last weekend. And a man asked me that. What are the reasons why women can't be priests? And I just looked around at him and said, well, the major reason is because we have penises. And this got his attention. And so I think, priest and penis and patriarchy, that helps in the pedagogy on this because there is no backing off of it. You just have to say it, get the word out of your mouth, and you say, okay, and then it becomes absurd. And I really recommend that. I think Dr. Zagano is very delicate in these matters and others as well. But I think that from the pedagogical point of view, sometimes it's helpful to simply say, if you do not have a penis, you cannot be a priest. It's as easy as that. And then the absurdity of the question becomes quite clear.
Well, there's actually been documentation on that. There was a priest in Colorado who had a sex change operation, and they said because of that, because his equipment had been removed, he was no longer a priest.
Yeah.
So that's really too bad.
It's one of the most shameful things, but it also is important to get it out there and just, let's just be frank about that. Be done with it, Claire. And, thank you for your question and just say that and then let the chips fall where they may. Let's go on to, is it May? Please?
You.
May.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this. I'm learning so much. Uh, would you elaborate on that, on what you mean by culture?
Well, there's what I mean by culture and what I think that Leo means by culture, which might probably more interesting and important on what he means by culture, because that to me is what's between him and a decision. And I was told that during the synod, and in fact, I was very busy during the synod. I wasn't at it. I was too busy at home writing things for synod members to deliver on the floor of the synod. But one of them told me that hotel meetings and meals, particularly with Middle Eastern and African bishops, demonstrated their almost hysteria at the point of women deacons. And that, as I said earlier, I was interviewed by the National Catholic Reporter. I said, well, that's fine. If they can't come along, it doesn't mean the whole church has to be bereft of the ministry of ordained women. So by culture, it is exactly those cultures where women, can't drive, can't go out of the house without a man. Look, it's only 50 years or so since women in the United States are able to have their own checking accounts. So we're talking about a seismic shift in places in the Middle East and in Africa. Having said that, I'm reminded of a comment made by the head of the kind of the Middle Eastern team, synod team at some point. He was a Maronite priest. And on the point of women deacons, he said it's time for us to recover our history. So,
Great.
see, culture, well, let me just say this, culture works both ways, because the argument, I debated Sarah Butler, who at the time was a member of the International Theological Commission. I debated her at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia. And she announced, well, no, we don't need women. Women deacons in history only ministered to other women. I said, well, who ministers to women now? I mean,
I'm gonna come back to you as soon as we finish the closing, and then you'll be the first person on the other side of the closing. Okay. I want to take seriously our time commitment here. And Phyllis, I hope you could stay around for a little bit because I can see there are plenty more comments. But in the interest of fairness, I want to offer my deep thanks to you for giving us our history between soft covers. And I really mean this. This book will endure. I heartily recommend the book, especially for theology classes on contemporary ecclesiology, because it is a cautionary tale, like watching the law and sausage being made. This is how the church changes. It's a cautionary tale. Secondly, I recommend it for parish and community study groups about how Catholic Church change can happen and why it doesn't happen, but it might happen. And it also gives realistic expectations to people, given the persistent patriarchal structures, what choices they might want to make now in view of how long their lives are going to be. And the third group that I really recommend this to are, like us on this call, individuals who want to study and realize, as I have read this over and over again, that the statement from the final document of the Synod is really right. What comes from the Holy Spirit cannot be stopped. However, what I think somebody edited out is what I would add to that statement, that what doesn't come from the Holy Spirit has to be stopped. Let me put it together. I think some editor just, they must have had a word count problem there. What comes from the Holy Spirit cannot be stopped, but I would say what doesn't come from the Holy Spirit has to be stopped. Or as the Irish say, they've made a dog's dinner of it, Sheila Curran. Haven't they made a dog's dinner of it? I think our needy world needs and deserves more and better from the Catholic community. And that means, as Teresa Kane said, women in all ministries of our church. And that's what you're doing, Dr. Zagano, and we thank you and wish you well.
Thank you.
Be sure to get the link to this video. The notes will come to you next week, and I will simply announce the last two water programs before we come back to May's second point. Next Tuesday, the 16th, we will have a ritual with Diane New celebrating the summer solstice, and that will be an opportunity to look at nature in its summit, the summit of its sumptuousness, a magical time for wishes to be made and wishes to come true. It's a significant turning point in the wheel of the year, Diane writes, so join us to celebrate. That will be next Tuesday. That is on the 16th of June at 7:30 p.m., same time, same station. And then the water meditation for July will be on July the 13th with Jean Christensen, Sister of Mercy, on the question of friendship. So as people from around water know, we always close for August and the early part of September. They also know that everybody's welcome at water programs and there is never a fee. We welcome donations, of course, and we believe at Water that if we share, together there's enough. If we share, it's the big F, together there's enough. At Water, it works out that way. If we share, as Phyllis Zagano did today so graciously and so generously, there is plenty. So with that, I say best wishes for a wonderful rest of your day and a continued commitment to peace, to equality, and to justice. The Zoom is now continued to be open for discussion if anyone wants to stay around, and I know I do. So May, we go back to you.
Thank you. I wanted to, I teach Africana studies and including studies of colonialism. And one of the things that I think is important to nuance is that colonialism profoundly affected African churches. Some churches left, independent churches left rather than go along with the missionary churches. But there's some brilliant women writing, and I can put it in the chat. Animeka wrote an essay about negofeminism, and she problematizes culture as an excuse. What I'm saying is, there's so many African Christianities, and some of the most conservative, I think, have been profoundly. It's not that they're traditional necessarily, but they've been profoundly affected by the colonial experience.
Well, let me say this. In May 2 years ago, the Greek Orthodox Church in Harare, Zimbabwe, ordained a woman as a deacon. I spoke to the ordaining prelate. He did it with the permission of the Patriarch of Alexandria and all Africa. He used the same ceremony. He just changed the pronouns. In October of last year, of October 2025, the Synod of Alexandria and all Africa affirmed that that was a sacramental ordination. That's the good news. The Synod also suggested, kind of off the record, that she not have altar service because there was a concern about her being near the sacred. So I think we're talking about the blood taboos that have been inherited by colonialism, because the Greeks certainly don't have that. The Greeks have married clergy. They have, and they have a great tradition of women deacons. The other African story I have is sitting at table with Wilfred Napier years ago. And he said, "Don't push your American ideas down my throat." I said, "Nobody's pushing anything down anybody's throat. You do what you want in your territory and in your archdiocese." So I think it's brick by brick. And I do agree with you about the many Christianities of Africa. But I will say that the pressure that is being levied upon at least the Patriarchy of Alexandria and all Africa in the Greek Church is coming from American money. And I don't get it. I just don't understand it. So.
Yeah, one thing, Phyllis, just a strategic suggestion is that every time Leo says culture, which he said so many times in that interview, it just got old. I would simply raise the question, let's talk about Roman Vatican culture. Let's not talk about Africa. Let's not talk about Latin America. Let's talk about the little square postage stamp called the Vatican, because I do think that if that's the argument, he should be responsible for speaking about his own culture first.
Well, I think he is. No, I must say, he is trying to follow on, add on to appointing women in positions within the Vatican. I have a long talk that unfortunately was not recorded at Fordham University called "Management, Not Ministry." They're okay with women in middle management positions. Nothing with real authority, because they still have authority conjoined with priesthood. But they still have this problem about women in ministry. And you'll notice I have not seen at a Vatican ceremony a choir that includes women singing from inside the sanctuary. Now that's Musicum Sacrum 1967 that says if a choir must have women in it, they may not sing from within the sanctuary. And I mentioned that to Cardinal Arthur Roach at a garden party. And he said, "Well, Phyllis, it's still on the books." I said, "But it's abrogated." I said, "Well, Arthur, it's still on the books." So if we're talking about changing culture, there are little details that are still you're able to point to say we don't need women here. And I think that's the and the other thing is, I wrote in New Zealand in a thing called Flashes of Insight, a whole thing about clerical narcissism, because I had dinner with Bob Wicks in California, and I said, to me, it's not clericalism, it's narcissism, and it's a narcissism that has grown from teenage boys who are now 50 and 60 and 70 years of age, and they cannot understand how to relate to women as adults. And so that's culture.
Yeah, I want to say something else about culture too, because I'm really quite wanting to be fair about things. But the question of putting women in administration seems to me to be the most effective current strategy to keep women from being ordained to anything. I think that's quite clear. And I also think that appointing as the head of the Vatican Communications Office a woman who led the Eternal Word television network, which is a well-funded anti-woman media outlet, is absolutely insulting. The same woman who worked for the Beckett Fund, which has a hideous track record funding cases like Hobby Lobby that took birth control away from thousands of employees in private companies. While comms people, I think, have some leeway on spin, you've been in this position, they essentially convey the message of the corporate heads. So even in comms, they don't have authority. And to put women as effective carriers, the better they are, the worse it is, the effective carriers of men's messages, this gives me very serious pause, because I think it's really a way to have it seem as if women have power, when in fact they're only doing what they're told by people who really do have power. And I've never underestimated the Vatican's ability to hold the line against women. But putting in women who will act against many women's best interests seems to me to be a new moral law, a low.
Well, on the woman at the dicastery for communication, I wouldn't turn her off so quickly just now. She was not liked at EWTN because she was too progressive. Well, that's not hard, but
Yeah,
but
but
she also is the one who got rid of Arroyo on EWTN, and to her credit, I you know I think in the long run, it's Leo is looking more towards placating the right-wing Catholic group, which has money. Yeah, exactly. Than he is on appointing women. But then you look at people like Cardinal Cherney, whose number two is a woman, and Cardinal Cherney's going to turn 80 soon. And I'll bet you dollars to donuts that woman will be the next prefect of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development. So that's not the prefect for the Congregation of the Bishops or clergy or anything. You can start saying what's important and what's not important. But I think it takes on the management side, it takes long time, and on the ministry side, it takes longer. I do know, and you may have talked to as many as I have of the chancellors, women chancellors in various dioceses. It just depends on whether their bishop is the adult in the room, on whether or not they are respected and have any say.
I guess where I'm coming from is when I think about we just came off of this wonderful 50th anniversary celebration of Women's Ordination Conference 2 weeks ago in Detroit, and there was a lot of really good energy there about what we have done in the 50 years of the non-ordination of women. Really tremendous accomplishments on the part of women in ministry across the board, without arguing any of the finer points of diaconate or presbyterate or whatever. But it occurs to me that the Vatican would not even have imagined having women in administration if we hadn't carried on about women priests, women deacons, women bishops. It would never have occurred to them. And so there's something ironic and perverse about putting women into positions who in fact for example, someone who worked for the Becket Fund, who come from places that are systematically eroding the rights of women.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like, wait a minute, 50 years later, I created, we as a movement created all this space for lots of women, for the imaginations of people to open to the possibility of women, and this is what we get. And so that's just a reality that I'm experiencing, and I think other longtime veterans in these movements are feeling that you can't control what comes into the space that you create, and that's both a humbling and a realistic thing to know. But there's also something strategically to be thought about that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But even so, the idea, well, I will tell you, sitting in Doma Sancta Marta with bishops, I sat next to one bishop, patriarch actually of his entire country. And he said, Phyllis, 20 years ago, this would never happen. I said, what? He said, I'm sitting at table with a woman. He said, 10 years ago. And we had 15 meals. I mean, it was crazy because he was there for a long time, and he'd tell me what time he was coming to dinner and all this kind of stuff. That to me is more pushing the needle than anything else, because they need to talk to women who have been affirmed as competent on a non-official basis, and I think that the work I did on the commission, certainly I spent 2 years of my life, I never got the rosary beads, we is a very interesting kind of thing. But I think I did more work at dinner than I did.
You should have sent him a bill, Phyllis. You should have sent him a bill. I mean, really, because one of the things that I loved about your book was you cited a study about happy young male priests. The study, I can't find it right at the moment, but
Right.
I love this part of the book. You cite a study of happy young male priests who encourage young men to join them. And then you say, and young women who are asked about getting into ministry say, run the other way. And
Trisha Bruce, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Trisha Bruce.
Yeah,
It's her study.
It's great study. Run the other way, say the young women. And I was thinking about that in terms of this new program that's opening at my alma mater, the School of Theology, Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley, now Santa Clara, synodal leadership MA program with free tuition for nuns from developing countries, co-sponsored by the Hilton Foundation and the Jesuit School of Theology. And I just think this is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. And women should be warned against this within an inch of their lives, that their presence will simply keep a school of theology going for men to get MDivs. I mean, how bald is this at this point? I think
Well,
it's extraordinary.
or by Bader, however, the dean has in his 5-year program
Right.
training women as deacons.
Well, I haven't seen that in the promo.
It is
Is
no,
it in the
but it
promo?
is there. It is in the 5-year program.
No, well, send it to me because I'd love to be able to say that because when I looked at the promo for this, it
No,
looked,
not for that, but in the 5-year program and it came out maybe 2 years ago.
yeah, I'd love to see it. I'd
Yeah.
love to, right.
But it's all and he was quite forceful that the session you are citing is when at the synod, I think it was the second, must have been the second meeting, but I don't want to say, but at a meeting of the synod, yeah, second meeting, um, people were able to meet with the study groups. Certainly it was the second meeting. And 115 people signed up to meet with study group 5. And they showed up, and there were 2 people there. One was a male officer of the CDF, a priest from Chicago, and the other was a female administrative assistant. And they said they were not able to answer any questions, but if you had any comments, and I have I have a copy. I think I may
In
even have
six
the paper.
languages. In
Yeah,
six languages.
but I actually have a screenshot of the paper in 6 languages that says this is where you can send your comments on the email. And, then after, of course, all kinds of consternation ensued, including the fact there were cardinals at this first meeting. That when a cardinal appears for a meeting, his equivalent is supposed to be there. There was never a real explanation on why no one came from study group 5. And so they called another meeting, and it's at that second meeting when Bader complained about, or Bater complained about uh, it being an overripe discussion about women deacons. And that's also where Tricia Bruce gave her comment that women in ministry who were interested were just advised to run the other way. And I think this is something that the
But
church.
you talked about it in the book, though. This was an insurrection I mean, from what
Well, it was, yeah.
time it was an insurrection, I think. But what his comment was, which was really rich, was to say, the question, the issue was that the diaconate question wasn't ripe yet.
Right,
Well, if a fruit is overripe,
right.
it's gone. And
Yeah.
I think that, that putting it in that kind of almost adage or in a very homey way, I think helps people to see that maybe we're at the point, and this is a question for you, Phyllis, maybe we're at the point where this question is overripe. In other words, maybe the question of the diaconate ought to be turned to the question of how do people work to fill the needs of the world, not through the diaconate, but how can the maybe we need to talk about something else, meeting the needs of the world, insisting that women do the service, the diaconal ministry, who do it are trained and paid and promoted. That would
Well,
keep.
this is what in Great Amazonia in 2019, Pope Francis said that it's precisely that the women who are Canon 517, paragraph 2, parish life coordinators should be have permanent appointments and be recognized and by implicitly paid. I wrote about this in the Irish Journal of Studies.
Yeah.
But the further implication of that comment is if Sister is a 517 parish life coordinator in Bolivia and running the parish, that's an argument in both directions against and for women in the diaconate. Perhaps she does not have the vocation to be a deacon, but she should still be managing the parish. And the other is about married priests. If Jack the deacon in the parish is ordained a priest, all of a sudden people will think he's in charge. So I think that there's a brilliance to the 517 paragraph 2, but there's also incredible resistance. You see it in the United States where they are twinning and tripling parishes. I'm telling you, 20 years ago, for example, Albany had more robust, and Los Angeles had more robust programs for parish life coordinators, secular and religious, male and female, married and unmarried seculars, everything, and in Albany, it was very interesting. Bishop Hubbard told me that you have to have a canonical pastor, and he named the canonical pastor as named the vicar general of his diocese as the canonical pastor. Why? Because the parishes that had parish life coordinators were here, there, and everywhere. They were 100 miles away. He wanted to make sure that it was understood that the parish life coordinator was running the show, and the parish life coordinator was hiring the priests. I was at Holy Family Parish in South Pasadena, California, probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And the parish life coordinator was definitely running that parish. She had 2 priests on staff. She had a huge staff and a huge parish, and it was running like clockwork. I had lunch near there just last February, and she's gone, and it's,
Not ordained.
Yeah. Let's see if anybody else has a question. They won't sleep tonight if they don't ask. So we don't want to disrupt any sleep. Okay, Carrie Roach, and then who's next? There was somebody else.
she went to lunch.
Carrie Roach, go ahead.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you. So I have examples of a dental office, and we have all these dental surgeons, but the person in charge of that office is the manager, who is a woman. So if we then look at Vitas, right, end of life care, it's for profit. It's a for-profit organization. All the women that are doing pastoral work, right? None of them are ordained, but I saw them. I was with them. They're doing what I understand to be diaconal ministry. So I just want to lift up Veronica, and I'm sorry, Mimi, and all the women with Mary and Diane who are actually doing the work and saying, let's use our imaginations, because you've been instrumental in helping me with my master's degree, right, in theology in the 1980s, because we had an AIDS crisis and people were dying left and right. So I actually had a school to go to because we had this horrendous, horrible plummet of everybody was dying.
Yeah.
And they needed ministers. And that's what's, like you said, when we have a tremendous need, the Spirit will flow, but we have to stop the stuff that's not letting us flow.
Well, I must say, thank you very much. I must say that I say this quite often, that at this point, bishops be lucky if they find women who are willing to work for them, because women are leaving with their husbands, their children, and their checkbooks. And we will have a smaller, purer church, as Benedict called it, full of Stepford wives. I mean, and handmaids.
We help them. I mean, I think part of our work really is to help women to see that there are alternatives, that they are worthy of being paid and having pensions, and that their work, whether presbyteral or diaconal, is very, very important and needs to be taken seriously. And there are places to do that which are not necessarily the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, but we have to recognize that the diaconal work of the church, as I said earlier, was picked up mainly by women religious who self-funded and created their own hospitals, social service agencies, educational institutions, and the institutes and orders that were advised to pay their sisters professional salaries are the ones that are not in trouble now.
Right.
And the institutes and orders that worked in diocesan structures are in trouble because they were renting a room in convents. They had to pay their own food and retreats and cars, and were being kicked out of convents now, right, left, and center as they age. And sometimes their mother houses don't have the facilities to take them. It's really a scandal. It's a growing scandal.
It is absolutely right. Absolutely right. And really, I don't see well, I see new institutions growing, especially from women's religious communities, but they're very, very conservative.
Sure, but they're not growing as fast as you might think, and the numbers don't kind of belie the fact that in one instance that I know, for every two that enter, three leave. So there's a turnover that's belying that particular situation. Look, if people want to enter a particular institute, that's their charism, go for it. But I would hope that they understand the financial implications when all of these 25-year-olds are suddenly 75 and 80. And I think that's what we need to recognize now as a scandal in the church, in the way that it has used and abused women religious, and
Right.
not properly paid or given them pensions, except where they were able to do it themselves.
And where they paid into Social Security, which was another linchpin on
Or
this.
bought into it. Judy has a note.
Judy Heffernan, and then I think I'm going to close it because we have taken more time from Phyllis Zagano, and she's would have had a chapter done by now. So go ahead, Judy.
I held back because I'm still so emotional from the WAC 50 gathering, and having been at the first one and having been at the 50th one. But I have to tell you, I so value when I spoke with you in Philadelphia in 2015. But you've reminded me today of that old theory about primal scream. That's what I wanted to do throughout the whole talk. Yet I'm so grateful for the depth and breadth of your knowledge and how it just flows from you. But I was at a Catholic seminary getting my Master of Divinity from 72 to 75. And when I read the ordination ceremony of St. John Chrysostom of his aunt, and my aunt was paying my way to the seminary and all my living expenses, I was like, yes, and I never had another question after that. I certainly learned a lot from Arlene Swidler and Jenny Radigan from living in Philadelphia about the diaconate. But I always felt to call to be a priest, but and I understood the argument back and forth, but I didn't understand the diaconate one. And I'm just so glad you haven't given up. And it's just so painful, though, to hear it. And yet you've also made me have to examine my conscience because of what's going on in America today in the government. I do think that maybe we're a different species than the men. I don't know, but in a different way. But I certainly appreciate all you've done. And I hope you keep going. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't thank you in a better way, Phyllis Zagano, than Judy Heffernan has just done. And of course, I laud Judy for 46 years of her ordained ministry in Philadelphia and what that has meant for so many of us around the world. Let me say for one last time, what comes from the Holy Spirit cannot be stopped from the final document. And I add, what doesn't come from the Holy Spirit has to be stopped. And one of the things that will stop it is this book, The Vatican and Women Deacons, Orbis Books 2026. Thank you to Phyllis Zagano. Thank you to Orbis for publishing this. And I understand why the officials in the Vatican are terrified. Because if they really sit down and read this, and particularly the bad B movie parts, I mean, it's just so embarrassing to think that people behave in such ways. I mean, professional people and people of a certain level of dignity and would-be holiness would behave in such ways. It really is scandalous. And so you've done a real service, Phyllis. I thank you. I wish you well. I support you as you continue in this work. And I thank everybody for being with us. Jackie Landry, Veronica Dunn, just looking across the people who've joined us since we started. It's great to have all of you with us, and please come again.
Thank you.